HBR community, welcome back. We are in week 4 of our video series, Royally Resilient. If you've missed us, we've been talking about the 7 C's of resilience that Dr. Ginsberg references in his book, Building Resilience in Children and Teens. We're joined by Beth Ferguson, our school psychologist, Mallory Wassman, our elementary social worker, and today we're excited to also have Tara Neidig, our middle school and high school social worker, joining us. Connection is one of our most favorite things to talk about, and so excited that that is the C of the week. When we think about connection, Ginsberg says human connection provides reassurance that we'll all be okay, despite tough times. And it gives us deep-seated security that convinces us we can take chances. Connection to other people tells us we can get through this together. Sound familiar? We support others during their troubles, which helps us realize we have a place to turn when we need support. Human connection allows us the luxury of being weak at times and letting others care for us while we re-energize. Connection isn't just about getting through hard times, though. It also lets us experience a higher level of security that gives us joy and a comfortable base that permits us to take chances. Connection. We've talked about connection together related to relationships, moving kids forward, repairing after a significant event through the trauma lens. Connection really lays a foundation that is irreplaceable. Well, let's talk about that.
I think it's not lost on me that we are talking about connection during this COVID closure, which really puts a new spin on it. For us, we talk a lot about connection at school in terms of building community and how we treat each other, the friendships that we establish. I mean, Mallory, you and Tara spend a big chunk of your day working on those social skills as a foundation for connection. But now we're put in this place where we are social distancing, which really is physical distancing. But it's not lost on me that if we take it to the social distance, we lose connection. Mm-hmm. And it's been fun to see how people are building those connections despite the physical distancing part of this. But he talks a lot about the connectedness of, he starts with really the family connections. And I thought that it was especially interesting that he sort of went into the different ways that we enhance, or the opposite of enhance, de-enhance our family time. And this COVID closure is definitely testing the boundaries and the bounds of family time. Mm-hmm. As an empty nester, it's more just between my husband and me, but I'm really curious, the three of you have children in the mix. What's that test like?
Very connected.
More than you. Well, what about, is it quality time? We know it's quantity, don't we?
Yeah, yes, he talks about that too, and there's definitely the quantity is there, but he kind of talks about what is more important, and I think Beth, you and I were kind of chatting about this, that quantity and quality are both, we hear about it a lot, and it is important, but it's that authentic time. It's that and are we spending good authentic time? We've got lots of time together, but what does that actually look like? And right now it looks like the 15 to 30 minutes that I get in between my Google Meets with my students, or to check in with Finley, and then to set those boundaries after my day is done, and make sure that I am trying to really engage in the way that I would if I had just picked her up from her sitter. It's definitely the different, but not necessarily all bad. It's just kind of adjusting to that new type of connection.
I think you just mentioned trying to be intentional, right? Like when you pick her up from a sitter after a work day, it's your first moment of connection, and you are intentional, you're present, you're displaying, I'm here for you, I'm ready to listen, I want to engage. And now when we're all together connected all of the time, um, it, it's really more important than ever to find those intentional moments. For me, it was before my oldest one got her license, I would drive her to school every day. I loved that morning time. Yes, there's a school bus. Yes, she could ride it. But for me, it was this is the 10 minutes of our day. It's just the two of us where we could chat. And she was chatty 4 out of 5 mornings a week. And so I think one of the things that really stood out to me in these chapters about connection is really how to be effective listeners for our kids. And when they're young, like Finley's age, it's constant stream of chatter oftentimes, and they want to just share everything and tell you everything. As they get a little older, and Tara has teenagers too, it's more like those moments that are truly authentic, that just pop up when they're ready to share. We have to be ready to listen, and our body language, our truly availability when they start to talk, matter how long they'll stay in that moment of sharing with us. And I think he really emphasizes in his work here that kids, they know, they can tell. So we have to set aside those intentional moments. It's the 10 or 15 minutes before everybody's shutting down and going to bed for the night, or it's breakfast together, or let's go take the dog for a walk. Some of those moments where we can truly be present and give them the quality, authentic moments of connection, and show them that we're here for you. We can be, I love how he also jumps into, then we can be interdependent of each other, even though you are growing and moving off to the next phase of your life where independence is important. That interdependent piece continues to be a life skill, and a need for us as people to maintain that connection. And he talks about independence and interdependent being children who they can be strong and resilient and self-sufficient, but interdependent meaning that they do want to work within a community, they want to be connected, they want to share ideas, they don't need specific financial help with doing task-oriented things. They can make their own decisions, but being a part of a bigger connection, and sharing some emotion, I think, is kind of where he's going there. I don't know. What you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's a fine line that we sometimes walk. And, when they're ready to take that step towards independence, it's difficult to judge. And I think it ends up getting kind of sometimes masked in less than desirable interactions.
Yeah.
And as parents, being able to keep the eye sort of on the developmental work, I guess, that they're doing, and in the midst of our own development as parents, that can be really challenging, and not something. I don't feel like I ever felt like I figured it out. And then I was sort of surprised when my kids left home and started families of their own, that I still was in that same rhythm of, do they need me to interject, or do they need me to step back? So it definitely isn't something you get to and go, okay, I'm done. I got that degree.
Yeah. The way he talked about independence in here too, I thought it was good. And you were just kind of alluding to this. So, how do we know that they're ready for these different phases of independence? I love the story he told was about kids. We notice when kids are going through a transition, or they're getting a little bit more independent, or a little more ready for these avenues of independence as they build their islands of competency. But he said they regress, and we see it. We get more of the attitude, or they act like they need more help, or they really come across as 2 to 3 years younger, they're back into a different phase, we would say, oh my gosh, they've regressed back to the other phase. And he said it like this, like, when you're going to take a leap, you don't just stand and swing your arms and jump as far as you can jump. We take steps backwards so that we can make a running jump, because we're going to jump further and land stronger with those few steps in between. So that really, I don't know, it spoke to me of that's what we see. They're taking those steps back, they're getting themselves ready, and then they're just going to launch. And through that steps back is sometimes some behavior that doesn't feel like we're connected. There might be some words that kids use around, I don't need that, I don't want that, I don't like you, you're the worst. But those aren't the words they're saying. What they're really saying is, I'm afraid, I think I can do this. Do you think I can do this? What do I need? So it's just, I think that's really good too when we think about, it might feel like they want us to pull away from the connection piece, but they truly need us to stay in it and be connected at that time.
Sure. And I'm seeing that with my oldest now. He's a senior, and he has done all year the push and pull, the take 3 steps back and then jump and then land and then look back and be like, oh, everything's fine. But then, a month later, the same process again. Takes the steps back, says awful things. It's his way of trying to move on and letting me know he's ready to move on, yet still have that safety net.
Yeah.
Ginsberg kind of talks about, any other species, the kids leave the nest so much earlier than in ours, that our kids play longer. Our offspring, I guess, is probably they stick around longer. And I know a lot of my friends, we were the boomerang, like we came back and we left, and then we came back and hung out for a little while, and then are leaving again. But I think what you're saying is that he's letting you know that he's ready, and I loved that. I don't know. I think that it's hard, and again, Finley's only 3, so we've got some time before she's going anywhere. But I think that's interesting that those behaviors are so typical of what we see, to let parents know that they're ready, and that it's that's what they're communicating, and why is that the behavior that they go to? What is that? What's that creating in us as parents? Like, what is it that we need to know that, okay, we've connected, and now it's time for us to let that rope go a little bit more.
Yeah, he actually talks about nature versus nurture, kind of, and how we're wired as humans. If our kids didn't act like that or do those things, would we ever let them go? And so it's kind of like this biological need, right? That they have to go through the pushing so that we're ready to say, okay, fly. But yeah, it's interesting. And it really speaks to the importance of, as they're going through development, to really widen their circle, right? He talks about it as, it's so important and critical that kids are connected to us as parents, but even more so connected to other adults and other supports within their circle and their community. My girls are super connected to their church groups, so they have their student community leaders. I would say each of them have a teacher that they feel, or an adult at school that they feel super connected to. Our family lives far away, so it's really just us here that they interact with on a daily basis. So they definitely, they have a friend. We have a couple friend that doesn't have kids, but they are Aunt Jen and Uncle Todd. And we used to have a neighbor who really tried to be like their pseudo grandma. And I know, that might hurt my family's feelings, but here within our structure, we've tried to widen our circle so that there are going to be times that maybe we're not the people that they want to talk to or feel super connected with in the moment. But they need to have other adults that make them feel safe and grounded, that they can trust too.
So true. I wrote notes to our sort of village when our boys graduated from high school, thanking them because honestly, it felt like oftentimes those folks were the gap when I couldn't, or when Rob, when we couldn't see clear through there was this like little bridge of connection that literally kept us all connected. And from the time that they were little, and those groups of people, those connections changed. We moved across the country when our youngest was starting first grade and our oldest was in fourth grade, and that was a huge shift then in our village, and we had to sort of rebuild it. And family members came into it then, so it's not like they were necessarily the same people throughout their lives. And it's funny not to watch my adult kids. I watch them creating. They don't have kids yet, but I watch them creating those connections that will become those folks. And there were rocky times with that. I can remember we vacationed or camped with a group of friends in Washington that were when our kids were younger, and there was one man in the couples or in the families who ran a very tight ship in his own family, and he decided that since we were together, he would become the rule maker.
Captain, oh captain.
We try to have some interactions with especially our very willful youngest, that resulted in sort of a group process then afterwards. But when I thought about that particular person, and I mean, he meant very well, and it was always about wanting to impress on our kids how much we loved them and how important it was to respect the area or the people and parents. And so even in those times that felt uncomfortable, those connections still demonstrated a really meaningful lesson, and always in any of those connections, were they aren't all sunshine and rainbows, right? I mean, they are going to be like our friend who tended to discipline our youngest at times, but the important piece on that is that the people we had around them, we knew were good people who led with empathy, to use my friend Brene Brown. It wasn't about themselves. It was about demonstrating different ways that they could show our kids that they saw them, and that they, talking about competence. And I think that when this one person would do it, it was sort of like you saying to Will, our youngest, you can be better than that. And so, yeah, I can't say enough about the importance of connections to just who our kids became as adults.
Beth, that's
a lot to that.
Such an important thing you just said too. Like this other adult was speaking to your son. You can be better, through the messaging. And I think sometimes our kids need to hear that from more than just ourselves, right? As their parents, because sometimes the message, I don't think, has come as clearly, or it gets kind of ignored because they think our view is skewed a little bit through.
They don't always hear it when it comes out of my mouth, but if one of my friends says it to them,
oh,
a little bit. Light bulb comes on. It comes out of someone else's mouth besides mine.
Hey, I'm really glad you brought up Brene Brown too, in the Lead with Empathy, because if you are not listening to her podcast, Unlocking Us, you really need to. It has spoken to me just immensely through this time. But big, huge follower of Brene. It started with her Braving the Wilderness book. We're really talking about how do you fit in and how do you be connected. And Jensberg talks about some of these same things in his book, and some of the guest speakers that Brene has had on her podcast recently have really just, again, it all comes together of how important is empathy, how important is it to really truly listen. In a recent podcast, she was interviewing Mark, help me out, Mallory.
Brackett, I believe.
Brackett.
Yeah.
And they were talking about, we seem to be really, as a society, focused on feelings, right? We want to be connected. We want our kids to know we love them. We are focused on feelings as a society. But he says, what's the first question you ask somebody when you see them? How are you doing? How are you feeling? How's it going? But we don't really ever want the answer. We don't want the answer. We don't give the answer, right? And when Jensberg talks about show up and listen and really how to listen to our kids, we need to want the answer. We need to be ready for the answer. And when that answer is, actually, I'm not doing well, and it's 5 minutes before we need to leave for school, we need to pause and we need to say, tell me about it. Why is that? We need to take the time to listen and to be there and to stay connected through that for our kids so that they can feel grounded and they can feel safe. And we need to do that with each other too, right? So I love that piece of it.
And he in the book says, he actually titles it, I think the little sub paragraph is called The Starting Point. And the starting point, he says, is empathy. And so, with Brene, leading with empathy, starting with empathy, the starting point, I think it's really important that, the authentic listening is really just truly trying to figure out what is their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't know for sure, what are my follow-up questions? Help me understand that more. I'm trying here. I'm trying to understand. I don't quite yet. So keep talking. I'm listening. And, I think that the listening and the empathy piece of it are so interchangeable and so tied together, but it's such an important place to start. If you're having a hard time connecting with your kid, listen, stop, and again, it all kind of ties together, get out of the way, but get out of the way by opening up your ears, closing this and doing more of this. And I think I think that's a huge starting place for us who maybe are feeling like we're having a hard time connecting. Spouses, we're talking about children and teens, but a little bit too. So I don't know. I thought that was, I love that he called it the starting point.
Yeah.
And now I'll get off my empathy band or soapbox and step down. But
it's important enough that he made a whole chapter in connection around listening.
Right.
And that listening is more than hearing, it's watching and being available and knowing your own, what you're bringing into it. So it's clearly important enough that, he really breaks that down.
Yep. And listening is different than hearing.
Mm-hmm.
That's always
right.
a big one.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think one of the questions, one of the questions he poses is it possible to love our children too much?
Mm.
Right. And I think last week we talked about instilling confidence in our kids and how we thought we were doing amazing things by our kids by instilling these supreme accolades like you are the best, you are the prettiest, you are the top, you're the fastest, you are the unique snowflake, to build their confidence and self-esteem. But actually we learned and talked a little bit about how that could sometimes have the opposite effect on our kids. And they could feel some pressure around, what if I'm actually not the fastest? And my mom says I'm the fastest, or my coach is telling me, I'm the top hitter, but I've struck out every time I'm at bat. So they can actually start to have some bigger feelings of incompetency and lack of confidence because they know that those are false praises, right? And so as he talks about some thoughts around connection too, just thinking about, no, it's not possible to love your kids too much, but it is possible to create them as the center of our world to the point where they feel like they can't live up to that expectation. So if our kids see that we're having a bad day because they're having a bad day, or that we're only happy when they're happy, the power that that provides kids to really um, control us as adults through their emotional state is scary for them. It doesn't model for them, a clear connected, a clear guide, a clear path of how to respond to emotions and feelings. It actually can, he says, cause them to become little micro perfectionists, if you will, because they're trying to be the center of our world. They're trying to be perfect because they think that that is what we would expect. So really making sure, and we kind of talked about this over the past couple weeks, that we love you no matter what, right? You're going to make mistakes and we're going to love you. And we're going to focus on what we love about you that's specific in your character. We're not going to over connect around the challenges or the mistakes that have made, but we just love our kids no matter what. And that unconditional love forms some of that buffer of what this connection can do for us.
Mhm. I think he talks about it blurring the
Yes.
lines, it like blurring the lines of connection. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, I just kept I kept envisioning, just being too close. I think of connectedness and I think of being close. And if you're you're too close, it's hard to see, beyond, you can't see the whole picture, or maybe you can only see what's right there in front of you. And so, I thought that was another really good analogy that I had in my head, of the actually physically getting out of the way,
Yes.
taking a step back, trying to bring that line and that connection more in focus, rather than for you and for your child, again, or your spouse, and and being able to really, this is not the right word because it's not a word, but unblur those lines.
I think that's a good word. I also think that that's something that when you have circles of, connections, that helps to do that. That especially if it's somebody that you trust and have a good connection with, that they can help to provide perspective, and be able to take that step back on whether it's your child or your relationship or even you. And to add to the spouse thing, I'm reminded as you talk that Rob and I did, and I think, Jessica, we've talked about this, that you guys did. We did a parenting class through our church when the kids were really little, and we lived in Washington. And they talked about couch time, the importance of couch time. So the couch time is intended to be when the time that you and your spouse work on your connection. So if you have somebody that is working with you as you're, embarking on these things, that helps to provide that same perspective. And he mentions in here the importance of nurturing that sort of first connection before you have the energy maybe to help in a healthy way, parent your kids, I guess.
I kind of keep thinking of it as almost like a spider web. When you've got all these pieces of the spider web connected to each other, but you've got to have a starting point, and that's got to connect, or else it's not going to be, as strong as it needs to. And also kind of not just a bridge to connect, but also that safety net of the "I'll catch you when you fall" kind of thing. That's just, as you're talking about that, you gotta be able to figure out where you're gonna start, and then help them branch out beyond the web.
Yeah,
I think that's really pretty when you stand away from them.
we talked about, or I talked about my friends in it, but I think there's also a role for our kids' friends. And honestly, that was harder for me because I couldn't control what stories they were bringing to my kids, and yet I am really thankful even now when I look back. I'm thankful for the friends that they had because they added to who the perspectives I think that my kids had as well. So we were fortunate with that. But and when we talk about knowing when to step back and sort of let them, it really becomes another story around competence and confidence when we don't try to interfere with the friendships that they have.
And that's
I mean, obviously, you don't want to see your child hurt or in a friendship that's going to lead down a negative thing. So I'm not saying you go, oh, well, that's the dice that you rolled on that. But, when I think that's part of that dance that we talked about earlier. When do I interject and when do I let them solve this or work through this or develop this on their own?
Yeah.
So that's we're in a time where it seems like, we don't let kids do, there are set up play dates. When I was little, I played with the kids that lived across the street and down the block. They were different ages and they were different genders. Two of my very best friends went to the Catholic school. I went to the public school. So we created our own connections that way. There were no such things as play dates for us. Now and I did it. It was fun. I had these grown women friends or men friends that had kids, and I'd want to get together with them, and hey, then our kids can hang out, and but when you were talking earlier about that independence versus interdependence, and when do we insert ourselves too much? When does the situation become almost a miniaturized version of our lives rather than really enhancing and supporting the independence of that child?
Yeah. Lots of good questions. He also says in the book, when you start saying, we are really nervous about our chemistry test on Thursday, might be a sign that the lines are starting to blur. Hey, I want to thank you guys for talking about this important topic today. I look forward to going live on Tuesday with our community to really dig in and think about and hear about what are they experiencing and how's connection working within your home. And, next week we'll talk about character, but leaving you with a question today of, do I understand that as my child goes through development, they are going to say and do things that are typical and important in their process of moving forward? Or am I going to take those things personally and let it potentially damage the relationship that I have, knowing that this connection is so key? That's the question he leaves us with. So we can kind of sit in that and think about that. Have a great week. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you guys.
You too.
You too. Bye.